Welcome to the People Planet Profit podcast. I'm Hayley Jarick, CEO of the Supply Chain Sustainability School, and today I'm joined by Hudson Worsley. Hudson is co-founder of the sustainability consultancy Presync. Presync is a certified B Corp specialising in innovative energy, carbon and climate solutions for the property sector. Hudson's career started as a management consultant with Arthur Andersen's utilities team. Then he worked inside TransGrid's risk and audit team before moving into sustainability in the development industry. He has led the sustainability team in Stockland's residential business, and in 2015, he led and wrote the City of Sydney's climate change adaptation strategy. Hudson has worked in the private, public, and not-for-profit sectors and holds a Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Business, and Masters of Environmental Management. In 2020, Hudson co-authored the paper, The Time Is Now, Decarbonising Building and Construction Materials, which laid the foundation for MECLA, which he co-founded with WWF, Climate-KIC, and of which he is now chair. So welcome, Hudson.
Hi, Hayley. Thanks for having me.
It's always fun to have your bio read out to you and you awkwardly sit there and have someone talk about you. But at the same time, it's really good to reflect on everything that's happened and all the achievements, because I think sometimes in this field you can work at things and you constantly feel like there's another bazillion things that you should be doing. But it's nice to actually sit back and go, hey, guess what? Like, we did some cool stuff and it, kicked goals, and now we're continuing on in that space. Do you feel like that sometimes as well?
I think so. Yeah. Sometimes it's just embarrassing and makes you feel old when you hear that you've got a CV like that. It's like, gosh, that's been going for a while. But yeah, it's sometimes good to reflect. One thing I would add is what MECLA stands for. It's the Materials and Embodied Carbon Leaders Alliance, and it is a collaboration of 150 members of the construction ecosystem. So that foundation research that you mentioned, that in the report, The Time Is Now, that was funded with some seed funding from New South Wales Government, and then Ben Waters, my business partner, and Monica Richter at WWF, and I went through our phones. Who do we know who works in construction who would have a view on, is embodied carbon an issue? Why isn't it addressed? Is it addressed? What are the barriers? What are the opportunities? What are the enablers? And you mentioned that my background at Arthur Andersen, where that was all about systems thinking, was one of the tools that they taught us as young grads. And I stood at a whiteboard with Monica and Ben, and we started to map out the linear process of a major project life cycle, development life cycle. And we quickly realized it's just not linear. And so the line diagram of processes became a very messy systems diagram of what are the material flows, where are the decision points, what are the financial flows, what's holding back change, what's driving change, and so on. And that was really the foundation of MECLA, because we saw, hang on, we've got these, we heard that there were suppliers who have new products that are lower emission, but unless they get to scale, they can't sell them at a good price point. We heard from buyers on the demand side, we'd love to buy that stuff if it was at scale and we could get it at a good price point. So it was clear that, it's harsh to call it market failure when the market is so immature, but it was, in the economic terms, it was market failure. And so how do we bridge the gap between supply and demand and scale and address things like standards, things like understanding, familiarity, access to markets and so on. And we realized, okay, we need to bring people around the table to solve this, because it's multi-stakeholder, it's multi-party, it's multi-jurisdictional, and it needs us all around the table. We hoped for 40 parties, and to have 150 now, we've kind of totally wowed by that and thrilled that, it's not a fringe issue anymore. These are major suppliers, major contractors, mainstream government infrastructure entities, and the good people at Supply Chain Sustainability School, of course.
Yeah, so full disclosure for everybody listening, I love being part of MECLA and chair a couple of their working groups and a part of the project control group as well. And I think it's probably one of the most rewarding industry collaborations that I've ever worked with, that everybody in the room is genuinely looking to solve all of the challenges that are in this space. For the because, you know, rightfully, like your report said, the time is now, right? We do need to work on decarbonising all of the industries that have really high embodied carbon measures in them, and construction is just one area. And this group have really sort of set the standard for how other industries should collaborate together in order to tackle big, complex, diverse, messy spaghetti diagrams of change as we come through. And that's not to say that there are no challenges. There are many challenges that we've all worked through, but I think everybody as part of that group has a really good mindset. And I think the one thing that you've echoed and really drilled into everybody as chair has really been, this is a do tank, it's not a think tank. This isn't a nice little theoretical exercise where we can all sit around and say, wouldn't it be nice if? It's a roll your sleeves up, get in, get dirty. You know, we're actually doing stuff here, and I think that has definitely shone through in the outputs that the group has managed to construct and then put together with events and resources available for the industry, and of course joining those dots and getting that change through. So congratulations.
Thank you. Well, you've been a big contributor. So I'm just, yeah, it like you say, it's satisfying. It's very rewarding to see people coming together and having that, having the platform, having the vehicle that then gives them access to the people they need to talk to, they want to talk to, but somehow weren't, because day to day means you don't have time to do it or access to do it. And as you say, it's a do tank. That's a term that I've borrowed unashamedly from my business partner, Ben Waters. And it's not to detract from think tanks. We're taking detailed academic studies or think tank outputs, but it's about the application of that rather than just the publishing of it and driving change. I've just come off a call with the Neighbours team about a discussion paper they've released about bringing embodied carbon into the Neighbours framework. And Carlos Flores, the director, quite generously said if it hadn't been for MECLA building the momentum, Neighbours wouldn't be looking at embodied carbon yet. It just, you know, it's the 150 members coming together and wanting to act on this and seeing the business opportunity to act on this that has prompted that government program, national program, to act on embodied carbon. And that's really gratifying. That's what success looks like when a coalition comes together to drive change.
Yeah, absolutely. So then if we sort of drill back a little bit, so what I want you to think about is just this next year that's coming up. So 2023, I keep saying it's well into 2023, and I keep saying Happy New Year to people, and I'm sure I will be until November. So, but sitting back and thinking, what are like 3 things that you think people should look out for over the next year?
So I'm obviously going to say embodied carbon as one. Not everybody is thinking about it. And 5 years ago, when it was first mentioned to me, I was like, oh, come on, we've still got so much to do on operational. Let's leave that. But we can walk and chew gum. And I think everybody in the property, in the infrastructure, in procurement needs to be thinking, okay, how much carbon's involved in that purchase decision, in that design decision? And so, yes, number one, and unsurprisingly, I've got a carbon lens, the way I look at the world. But that's within a broader system. And so the next thing I'm convinced will be a growing phenomenon, a growing discipline in 2023 will be the circular economy. There's no point in looking at embodied carbon in isolation unless you're a scientist who just loves that stuff. Go for it. But for everybody else, I think embodied carbon matters because of the climate impact of the emissions. But the bigger concept of circular economy, speaking of systems diagrams and systems thinking, the application of a circular economic model is probably the best application of systems thinking to a human-made environment that I can think of. Think of the ecosystem of a rainforest. We have our own rainforest of industry and cities, and the circular economy is a way of managing that human environment without constantly extracting the raw materials and then rejecting waste materials into the biosphere without any recognition of planetary boundaries. So circular economy, number 2. And number three to watch out for is greenwash. I think it undermines everything that sustainability professionals are doing. Having worked in the corporate sector, it's easy to understand how it happens. Well-meaning people without the content go, oh yeah, that's very green, yep, and then they run with the grab, the soundbite, but without the substance behind it. That's best case scenario. Worst case scenario is a really cynical, basically lying or using green to perpetuate business as usual, which is fundamentally unsustainable. And so when you look at some of the controversy around carbon credits at the moment, carbon abatement, the willingness of cowboys to get into that because they see a quick buck, that undermines everything else we're doing. And, for those that, organisations that have high emission activities and high emission business models think they can buy their way out of change and continue with business as usual, when fundamentally the planetary boundaries, what the Earth can provide and absorb, is the limit of what we can do. And so avoiding greenwash, being very aware of it and calling it out, call out the bullshit when you hear it, when you see it. I think that's incumbent on us all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you've touched on a really sort of like a psychological point for most people is actually thinking beyond your lifetime. So I know we live in a world where everything is so fast paced and everything's quick and everything's getting out there, and it's something that happened yesterday is already out of date, all of that stuff as it goes through. But to try and think of, if you're only thinking about your lifetime, you're short-sighted. And that's a concept that I hope we can instill in the next generation of people that come through. We're certainly starting to see that in all of their buying trends and having that concept greater than themselves, having that greater purpose as they get out there and working with the environments in which that they play, live and work and breathe. And I really hope that gets in there. I mean, and there are some deplorable human beings out there, unfortunately, that not only do bad things for the environment, but do bad things to other people. And, we've really got to keep an eye out for those. And the ones that we can focus on is the educating the ignorant so that they don't accidentally do things like greenwash. And that's certainly been a big part of my green marketing journey, is just sort of finding that balance between being technically accurate and then talking in a language that people can understand. And it's just really, it's a tightrope that people are learning and getting through. But it is something that a lot of people are going to focus on and getting in there. So those are some three really big areas. And I think you're right. We're going to hear more and more and more about those and then playing in that space over the next year. And I think beyond as well. So I'm going to sit back and then, get you to be a little bit creative for the next couple of questions. So we talk a lot about the technical and get into detail with a lot of the technical with work. So I'm going to turn this into a little bit of fun and then sort of sit back and just think, you know what, like you'd love to be able to change things. You'd love to be able to do things. And a lot of what we do is trying to influence other people to make their changes in their lives. But I'm just going to give you like ultimate reign in Australia and like, all right, you're going to be king of Australia for a week. You have ultimate right over changing whatever you need to do and influence. What do you do in that week?
Well, firstly, as a member of the Australian Republican movement, I'd probably choose to be head of state rather than king. But that's a tangent.
I'm working within the current constitutional construct that
yes. And we know how hard constitutional change is.
Yes.
So the first thing I'd do would be to stop new fossil fuel extraction. I think, all of the work that you and I are doing, Hayley, and the professionals who go through your school are doing to incrementally reduce our emissions, whilst at the same time government is subsidising and permitting massive extraction projects that are, blowing away any progress that you and I are making simply because they're the fuels that are causing the problems that we're trying to solve. So, but that doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. Either side of politics has to lead us, industry and communities, through an exit plan from those industries and a transition plan to alternative industries. And there are many. It's not saying anti-mining, it's just anti-fossil fuel mining. Australia is, rich in 6 of the 7 key ingredients that are going into the batteries of the EV transition that's underway. But we don't make them here. We export the raw materials and then buy back Teslas and BYDs and Nissan Leafs and so on. So I think with some, all the brain power in the bureaucracy, all of the capital sloshing around in our massive super funds, put those two things together with some entrepreneurialism in our corporate sector, and I just see that the raw ingredients are there for a massive economic transition that, for short-term budget balancing and shareholder appeasement, we're not taking. But that if our new King Charles III, has the Terra Carta, I believe, his stamp for the planetary future and sound sustainability practices. If I were him for the week, I would make sure that applied to Australian industry, and the smarts, the skills, the labour was applied to the transition rather than this black or white. It's green or it's jobs. It's coal or it's lights out. I think we've moved past the operational side of it's coal or it's lights out, but we haven't weaned ourselves off at all from the export income that comes from coal, comes from gas and oil. That will take work, but it should have started 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. But we've now got new government who've come with some terrific climate targets that are really playing catch up, but are then totally undermined by new extraction. That would be my focus.
Yeah, I think that it's so right, and I think that like you said, it's that often that analogy of do you put a band-aid over something or do you try and stop the bleeding? Let's try and stop things from leaking and causing the problems rather than just trying to patch things up on the end of it. And I think that even to circle back to one of the earlier responses, like you said, talking about the circular economy, most people think that's all about recycling and waste. But I mean, the biggest target for the circular economy is avoiding the production of things in the first place, avoiding purchasing if you don't need it, avoiding even generating the need to pull out those resources from at the start of those circular practices and circular workings between collaborations. And I think that's kind of, you're right, it's kind of a how do we stop the problem at the start of where it's been caused and not just trying to clean up the mess at the end of it. And wouldn't that be nice?
Wouldn't it? Look, I'm optimistic that we can get there simply because when I was first introduced to the triple bottom line and the writing of John Elkington, I was handed one of his books, Cannibals with Forks, when I was still working at Arthur Andersen in the early 2000s, and it just made sense. The triple bottom line, it just resonated with me and thought, well, yeah, of course, duh. Like, it was such a logical framework through which to manage resources, manage an economy, to run a business, to run any organisation really, and it was almost irresistible. It just made so much sense. And so to me, the circular economy, the idea that I don't need to buy a laptop, I need the services of a laptop. And so I would much rather have a service level agreement with Apple or with HP or whoever to have here's $1,000 a year, and I want a durable laptop that has the software that I need. And then if it breaks, I bring it back to you. At the end of the lease, I bring it back to you. I don't need the laptop. I don't need the aluminium and all of the congealed electricity that's gone into building that aluminium that's then built the computer. I just need access to a platform to give me the software. That's all. And the same goes for a vehicle. Many of the things that we buy and then discard, we don't actually need to buy, we just need their services. And I think we're learning that with energy, that we need energy services rather than be wedded to the source of that energy. And so just as, a while ago, the political slogan that coal is good for humanity, it's like, well, actually that's getting way too specific. Energy is good for humanity. Where that energy comes from needs to be specific to, where you are. And so I think the same, we need mobility rather than we need a car. We need, somewhere to launch our software rather than a computer. That mindset at the consumer level opens huge opportunities at a business level, and that change of mindset can be one of the big steps that we need for the circular economy.
Yeah, I think you're massive. There's so much opportunity in that space. I mean, I know that, as a service is probably another term that gets thrown around a lot as well.
Yeah.
And certainly, like, my local library lets me borrow more than just books. I can borrow many things. I've even got a local tool library, so I don't need to go out and buy a circular saw to have that one long weekend project and then store it in my shed. I can just go and borrow a saw for the weekend and then let that sit there as a communal resource for other people who might also have a weekend project that they want to resource as well. And I think that's that mindset change that I need to own things. And I need to accumulate things as if, the stockpile is a measure of wealth or value.
Yes.
Is certainly a cultural shift that I think that we need to make in terms of, where people are at and how they feel valued for the type of wealth that they provide. Because I feel like I offer a lot of wealth because I don't own a lot of those things.
Yeah.
And there's sort of prestige in borrowing.
Yes. Yeah. Kind of kudos of, you don't own it, you borrow it and you lend it if you do own it. I think that also ties into what you were saying earlier, Hayley, about the intergenerational thinking rather than just me. And, that me, very 80s, 90s kind of, I'm worth it. One of the cosmetic brands had that slogan, because I'm worth it. And I'm thinking, I get I can just see the marketing team throwing balls around in their creative space and then testing it with their consumers. But in reality, we need to be, because the planet's worth it. It's not just about me. It's about future generations. And the idea that the more toys you have in the sandpit, you win. We're still in that world, because I was talking to a friend who'd come back from 10 years living in Germany recently, and she was amazed. She said, "Oh my God, the size of the SUVs in Australia has just gone nuts. All of, trades used to drive a ute or a van, and they're now driving a massive twin cab with all the accessories you can imagine, and families driving massive SUVs." And she's right. In 10 years, that as a symbol of wealth has become a real statement.
Yeah.
And from a sustainability point of view, not a positive development at all.
Yeah, I agree. So then, if we're reflecting back on time, so if you go overseas or come back, the next question is going to ask you, because we were joking before we started this recording about what our kids think of us.
Yes.
So I'm going to revert you back to think about what you wish your younger self knew. So what's just one thing? If you could go back in time and tell your younger self something, or just make sure they knew it, what would it be?
I think my younger professional self, I think it would have been to be more confident in calling out the bullshit and the greenwash. So, I mentioned working at Arthur Andersen. That was a real formative experience for me, because I was there when the Enron scandal hit, and so we all lost our jobs. And I remember, they lost their job. Arthur Andersen lost its license to operate because an office in the US was under investigation attached to the audits it had done for the Enron energy company. And when the investigation began, the partner in charge ordered his team to shred all of the paper documents and delete all the electronic files. Now, anyone with even an ounce of business ethics would jump on that and say, hang on, no, sorry, boss, can't do that. I get the pressure of a grad when the boss tells them to do something, but this was everybody doing it. And at the time, I just thought, hang on, that's just such unethical behaviour. Other people in the firm were like, no, they were just unlucky. They got caught. That was just bad risk management. And my gut said, no, that wasn't bad risk management. That was deeply unethical behaviour. And, I kind of bit my lip because I was, relatively junior in my career, but I knew my gut said, hang on, that just wasn't right. And it should have been called out. Fast forward, working for a consultancy that was considering doing some work with a coal mining company, And I'd read the John Elkington book by then, and I was thinking, hang on, you just got to leave it in the ground. We can't be involved in that. We know it's not right. To go and work on a public transport project to get people out of cars, and then to go and work on a coal project, got to call it out, leave it in the ground. And so I think if you know that climate change is the greatest threat we face at a global level, and you're in a decision point or part of a decision that can contribute to the solutions or contribute to the problem, I think you got to call it out. I know you've got to call it out. That's what I would be saying to the 25-year-old me.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. I mean, I was one of those people who used to, I'd love to have the knowledge that I have now back then in order to call out more things that I now realise were completely wrong. But I think you're right in terms of those gut ethical things. Well, one, participating in the auditing and letting it go through to start off with, let alone being caught and then looking to shred documents, I think is that, let's go back to where ethics even plays into that whole scenario. Yeah. But I've always been proud of the fact that I've made people uncomfortable sometimes, because you don't just smile and nod. And I think even more so now, now that I'm in a position where I can do it more often without being, like you said, like being a grad where I think I'm going to lose my job for it, I feel like I do that more and more and more, whether it's the casual sexism in a room or casual racism as it goes around, or just even quietly just calling out, questioning things when people start cracking jokes that are inappropriate, or not laughing at things, or asking for things to be taken down, or requesting, asking the question why there isn't the diversity in the room that we're sitting in. I think all of those, that having that confidence that I have now to be able to do that, and like I said, with the knowledge behind it as to what that really then flows through to, should be really interesting. So I'm glad that you mentioned that around just having that more confidence. I think a lot of people, it's a really good one for people to then sort of sit there and reach out to, because even if it's not your boss that you can talk to, there's certainly other people in the industry that will listen to you and support you if you have the confidence to go and reach out to people. So I hope that everyone listening can take that on board and learn something, especially all the young guns out there. And, all of us more mature people probably need to be told that occasionally as well. So it's probably a really good thing in there. So that's the end of our podcast. So I'm going to say, Hudson, thank you for joining me today and having a good old chat.
That's my pleasure. It's been good fun. It's good to reflect on these things, because day to day it's writing emails, managing meetings, looking at spreadsheets. I'm lousy with spreadsheets, but you've got to do the detail. Every now and then it's good to sit back and contemplate the bigger picture, and to keep moving. I don't want to sound too pious though. The ethical muscle is something that has to be exercised. I'm a member of the Ethics Centre. I used to be the St James Ethics Centre, and by being engaged in that, by reading their materials, attending some of their events, hearing the discussion, it's the active thinking, it's the act, and then the act of doing that matters. So I don't want to be sitting back as the pious righteous police by any means, because it's about action. We've got to get on and do stuff, and that's the do tank that we work together in. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. And thank you everybody for listening to the People Planet Profit podcast. Until the next episode, goodbye.